Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Dr. Robert J. Wicks will teach us how to maintain a healthy presence and find peace during unpeaceful times. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel. I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you via email tomorrow. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Robert J. Wicks received his doctorate in psychology from Hahnemann Medical College and is professor emeritus at Loyola University, Maryland. An international speaker, Wicks has also taught in a number of universities and professional schools of psychology, medicine, social work, nursing, education, and theology. He has authored more than 50 books, including No Problem, Streams of Contentment, and Riding the Dragon. Bob, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful.
I'll base the presentation on a number of my books. One of them will be Riding the Dragon, and then Everyday Simplicity and Prayerfulness, and they're all from Ave Maria Press. The only non-Ave book is Night Call, and that's from Oxford University Press. For those of you who don't feel like reading, but do have a question and you can't get the question in, feel free to email me. rwicks, W-I-C-K-S, at Loyola, LOYOLA.edu. We really have a need for compassion during these tough times brought by a pandemic and racial unrest and a number of other pressures that people are experiencing, both systemically and individually. And so the call for all of you and for me is to provide a compassionate presence. I was surprised, I guess it's now about a year ago, I received an invitation from Ethel Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's widow, to attend the 50th anniversary memorial of his death. And when I went there, they had a lot of great speakers. Bill Clinton was there, a number of people. But what struck me the most was Robert F. Kennedy's words that they would intersperse. And he said, one of the things that he said is, we can do better. We can do better. And I believe that we can and we must today with so many needs. Being a compassionate person impacts others. As the Chinese proverb goes, when the tide rises, the boats in the water do as well. And also being compassionate benefits us. Physician and humanitarian Albert Schweitzer once said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. I think that's true, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. I was walking along and I ran into an old friend who's a spiritual director, and I said, hey, good to see you. How are you doing? And instead of, the usual response, fine, and some details, and she got all filled up. And she said, no one's asked me that in a long, long time. Given this lack of support for persons like yourself, who reach out to so many in your interpersonal network, what I've come to speak to you about is maintaining a healthy perspective, avoiding dangers that lead to unnecessary stress, improving self-care, knowing the four voices we need in our circle of friends to have balance and courage in life, facing darkness and developing a richer sense of clear. Now, that's a lot of stuff. I'm going to try to pack it in and in the time allotted, because when I asked Ave, I said to Erin, I said, do you want me to be inspirational? You want me to be informative? You want me to be humorous? She said, no, I want you to end on time is what I want. So I'm all set for you. Now, first, let me set the stage for a few moments. My work over the past 35 years has involved two elements. One is the prevention of secondary stress, and that represents the pressures that results in reaching out to others. As a result, I work with, family members and the general public, but I also primarily work with physicians, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, educators, social workers, counselors, members of the military and police, and people in full-time ministry. And as I said, people like yourselves in different kinds of ministry, but also, parents, maybe adult children of older parents. So that's the first. The second is resiliency, psychology, and spirituality. And this is interesting because it's designed not simply to help people bounce back from stress, but paradoxically, because of it, to become deeper as persons, both psychologically and spiritually, in ways that would not have been possible had the trauma or stress not occurred in the first place. Now, these are, as I mentioned, very challenging times, and the needs of others can catch us off guard at times. So we're blindsided. I was at Dover Air Force Base to speak to the unit responsible for fallen military. So when somebody dies in Afghanistan or Iraq, they fly them back to Dover, and this unit is responsible for them, to welcome them with dignity and also to take care of their family. So the family will come in and they'll stay over at the base in this house that's made available to them. And on one of those occasions, one of the little boy was, I guess, about 8, and it hadn't hit him that his dad had been killed. And all of a sudden he realized it, and he said to one of the volunteers, well, who will play ball with me now? And luckily that person was from his town, and he said, well, I will. I think also not being aware of serious stress in our lives as we seek to reach out to others, which is the call of our religious faith group, can actually be quite dangerous. I was working with chaplains in Germany, Army chaplains who had just returned from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was getting ready to give a talk on resilience from my book, Bounce. And a full bird colonel came up to me and he said, before you give the talk, I need to caution you. I said, what's the caution? He said, there's a lot of ghosts in this room. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's nothing left inside them. However, I want to broaden the topic this afternoon because the seeds of compassion and the seeds of burnout are the same seeds. Every one of us needs to be concerned, not just professional helpers and healers or members of the police or the military. It's my belief that for every case of a spiritually committed, compassionate person experiencing significant stress, there are at least a dozen of us also experiencing some form of spiritual and psychological burnout. Being torn apart by stress is common today because of the difficulties going on in the world, pressures we experience at work, troubles in our family, and even encountering darkness within ourselves. Now, the problem is that most often stress is now this is important, a developmental process, not a cataclysmic event. And what do I mean by that? It can creep up on us. Author and media theorist Marshall McLuhan once said, if the temperature of the bath rises 1 degree every 10 minutes, howl the bather know when to scream. I don't think we know when to scream today. And it's very easy for us to lose our way when we're seeking to live a good life as committed friends, parents, children, siblings, co-workers, or in any role we were called to be compassionate. When I was in South Africa, I was giving a talk on resilience post-apartheid. And at the break, a woman came up to me and she said, well, I just can't do it anymore. And I said, well, what is it that you do? She said, I'm a social worker and I work with women who've been sexually and physically abused, and I try to get them justice. And for them to get justice, they need to take off time from work, which they can ill afford because they're poor and they're often single parents. But they do it. And we get to the court, and the judge, who's often male, looks at the material and says, oh, I haven't had a chance to read this yet. Make another appointment. She said, I'm not succeeding. I'm a total failure. Well, she was very upset, so I let the dust settle a little bit. And then I said to her, well, who was with that woman other than you at that moment? She said, no one. I said, would it be an exaggeration to say that you were closer to her at that moment than anyone else in the world? She said, no, it wouldn't be. And then in as gentle a voice as I could muster, I asked, and you want to leave that? I said, don't you realize we are not in the success business? We are in the faithfulness business. In our sometimes intense interactions with our family, friends, and coworkers, members of our church, and those who come to us for guidance, we may not appreciate the reality and eventuality of failure. You see, the more you're involved, the more you care, the more you're going to fail. Statistically, that's the way it works. So we need to put failure in perspective. When I work with surgical residents, I say to them, before we get into this whole resilience stuff and self-care and maintaining a healthy perspective, I said, let's face a reality. During your tenure as a surgeon, you are going to kill some people. Maybe not through malpractice, but certainly through mispractice, because it is totally impossible to be at an A level 100% of the time. And the same thing as educators, as parents, as siblings, as workers, it's just impossible. Failure is part and parcel. You see, commitment is expected of us, so we better be able to put failure in perspective. A contemporary of Jesus, Rabbi Tarfon, once said, the day is short, the work is great, the laborers are sluggish, the wages are high, and the master of the house is insistent. It is not your duty to finish the work, but you are not free to neglect it, unquote. Alan Bisak of South Africa echoed this theme in saying, we will all go before God to be judged at some point, and God will ask us, where are your wounds? And if we're honest, we'll say, we have no wounds, Lord. And then God will ask, was nothing worth fighting for? Now you might say, oh, I don't have to worry about that. I have plenty wounds that I have, as a result of my involvement. But I'll challenge myself and you, are they real wounds? Or are they wounds tied to our own ego, our unrealistic expectations of ourselves and of others? You see, I think that we often come into it because of our big personality. We've lost perspective. We're no longer connected with God, because when theonomy, God's will, and autonomy, our will, intersect, we have true freedom and understanding of failure. It happens to us all. I remember once going to speak to a group with terrible morale. And they didn't know who I was because I'm not famous, but I got in the room and you could cut the hate with a knife. I thought, I better not do a slow build up. I'll give them my best shot. And I did. Nothing. I was clinically impressed. I've never seen people able to keep hate at such a high pitch for so long. And at the break, I went back to my room and I prayed the prayers of a person with a big ego, like, relieve me of this. I even moved into some Old Testament laments like, smite them and their little children. And I can sense Jesus saying, I know where you got that, but we don't do that anymore. And in that reflection and prayer, a piece of scripture bubbled to the surface that I heard many, many times, but didn't get. But I got it now. What bubbled to the surface is, they did terrible things to me and the prophets before me. They will do the same to you and worse at times. I sensed the Lord saying to me, Bob, you normally say religious things and people smile and they embrace you. But when things get difficult and you fail, you want to run away. Our stress can also partially be the result of what is referred to as parallel process. It is where we mimic the patterns of those we guide, minister, care for, or supervise. About a year and a half ago, I was asked to fly into Beirut in Lebanon. And the plan was to bring Christian caregivers who were living and working in Aleppo, Syria, into Beirut, where I would speak to them through an Arabic interpreter. And when I was with them, I could sense right away they were experiencing being totally overwhelmed, because they were trying to meet the impossible demands of people coming to them and asking for what they couldn't deliver. And they also were worried because ISIS was breathing down their neck. So as a result, in response, they tried to be God, and they felt discouraged and overwhelmed, and it was tough for them. And when they came to see me, they put that sense of helplessness onto me, which is very natural when you work with people in difficult situations. But in response, what I tried to do is not react, but do a double reflection, reflect on what they're going through within myself, and then reflect with them. And when I reflected with them, I said, I did the debriefing of relief workers evacuated from Rwanda during their bloody genocide. I've been in Cambodia. I've done a lot of things, but I don't understand your situation. I'll never be able to appreciate what you're going through. However, you deserve whatever you can get from this conference, and I hope you get it. In such instances, we must be able to lean back amidst the stress so we can be prayerful and mindful rather than simply react, But we often forget that. I was at Walter Reed Army Hospital, and the physician, said he had a question. I said, "What's the question?" He said, "Well, my life is falling apart, and I just came back from a war zone. I'm cutting people's legs off. It's awful, and this and that." And I said, "Well, what do you do right after work?" He said, "Well, I go home." Now he's angry at me, which often happens to me. And I said to him, "Well, you can't do that." He said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "When you go to a restaurant and you go to the bathroom, what's the sign say over the sink? It says, if you work here, you need to wash your hands before going back to work. Those of us who work in a hospital know that when we go to the bathroom, we need to wash our hands not only after we go to the bathroom, but before, so we don't contaminate ourselves and those patients that we deal with later." I said, "You're leaving here after the day spiritually and psychologically contaminated. You need to decontaminate. Otherwise, you're going to remain contaminated, and you're going to contaminate your family when you return home. Psychologically and spiritually, you're going to be limping." He said, "Well, what do I do? Is it a big deal?" I said, "No. Simply take out some quiet time after the day is over in your car or drive somewhere. It doesn't need to be long, and let the dust settle." So that's necessary. Now, you might say, "Well, yeah, I'm prayerful. I know that." No, it doesn't work that way. Unless every day we take out at least 2 minutes in silent solitude and wrapped in gratitude to center ourselves, we're going to think that prayer is not important. I remember when I was speaking in Cambodia, at the break, a Buddhist nun came up to me and she said, she said, I've got a problem. I said, sister, what's the problem? She said, oh, we have a young Buddhist who's chaplain in the hospital in the unit for farmers who've had their legs blown off by landmines. I don't know how much you know about landmines, but they're made of plastic, so they'll clear a field, and then the monsoons will come, and the ones from the fields that are not cleared will go into those fields, and the farmer will go out thinking it's safe and have a leg blown off. So the Friends Committee had opened up this unit with prosthetic devices that are fitted, so the farmer can, somehow return to normal activities. And this poor fellow was getting depressed. So she said, what do I do? And I said, well, sister, when he comes down and sits in his car before he goes back to the temple, when he sits in his car and he meditates for a few minutes, what comes up in his meditation? If you tell me that, it'll help me, be able to give you a better response. And she looks at me like a deer caught in the headlights. She said, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I said, what are you embarrassed about? She said, doctor, I am a Buddhist nun, and I forgot to tell him to meditate. The reality is, I think we need to see that we put prayer on such a low level. I remember one bishop saying, I don't know if prayer really does anything, but I do know one thing. When I stop praying, a lot of good things stop happening. So we're going to speak a bit about prayer. So those who come to me, wanting to maximize within their resiliency range. Now, your resiliency range is already formed by genetics, DNA, early childhood experience, but we seek to maximize within it through motivation, through knowledge, and hopefully wisdom. And at the heart of the resiliency enhancing process is the need to gain, regain, and maintain a healthy perspective. The next slide, please. So this whole sense of perspective is very, very important. And, as psychiatrists and psychologists, we often get credit, for, enhancing perspective. But long before we even thought about it, religion was interested in perspective. In the Talmud, we read, you do not see things as they are, you see things as you are. In the Christian New Testament, in Matthew 6:22, if your eye is good, your whole body will be good. Buddhists speak about it as the unobstructed vision, and Hindus in the Upanishads, a turning around in one's seat of consciousness. So this sense of perspective is key. One spiritual master said to a disciple who was forever complaining about others, he said, seek not to change others, but seek to change yourself instead. He was speaking about perspective. He said to the disciple, remember, it's easier to protect your feet by putting on slippers rather than trying to carpet the whole of the earth. But what happens? Most of us leave the house each day and quickly enter, the carpeting business because we have two crazy ideas. First is that people will appreciate what we do for them. And even more psychotic is they'll actually follow what we suggest. Instead, we need to give with a sense of mitzvah. What do I mean by that? Giving and expecting nothing in return. This is a 1 Corinthians 12. You find your charism, you feed your charism, and you share your charism. That's essential. It is in doing that we begin to see that it's a circle of grace, and that we're not just giving to people during the day, whether it's our children, our family, our friends, coworkers, whatever, in our roles, we're also receiving. It's a circle of grace. We're not just reaching down to some poor socks. Instead, we're there to give and receive. So where do we begin to have a balance here? Well, I think that actually Jesus provides the best advice. When I was young, I came across this quote in scripture, in Matthew 22:34-40. And since then, I believe it's not only the secret to a healthy spiritual life, it's the key to life in general. And in that passage, as you may remember, the Lord is asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he, like other rabbis, reaches into Torah for his answer. And he does it in real rabbinical ways. In other words, he puts people at their ease, and as soon as they're at their ease, he pulls out the rug from under. Because he reaches into Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And he said, he responds by saying, the greatest commandment, obviously, is to love God with your whole heart and your whole mind and your whole soul. So what he's done is he's reached down into Torah and selected one of the heavy precepts of the 613 precepts of the Pharisees of the day, and he's held it up high. But then he reaches down and takes a light precept, and he holds it up on the same level as the heavy precept, and he says, and you must love your neighbor as yourself. And in doing that, he focuses on the three elements in the spiritual life that if we keep in balance, and for each of us, it's going to be different at different times, we'll be in good shape. And that balance is between presence to others, because I don't think it's possible to experience true joy without sharing ourselves with others. Presence to yourself through self-knowledge, self-care, and self-love. And it's essential because you can't share what you don't have, see? Physician and Catholic writer Walker Percy once said in one of his novels, what if life is like a plane and you miss it? It's easy to do, being committed and caring and religious and spiritual. And also, you can't share what you don't have. So presence to self is tied to presence to others. And finally, the most important presence to God. So let's briefly look at these three areas of presence. First, presence to others. Excuse me. Now, presence to others, I don't want to say too much about it. I'd like to focus more on you in prayer, but presence to others really involves simplicity. Children know that. The little girl was late coming home from school one day, and her mother was worried. And she said, where were you? I was worried. She said, I was helping a friend who was in trouble. She said, you what? Well, what did you do for her? And she said, I sat down next to her and helped her cry. Presence. The second is respect. A patient of mine was coming to the end of her therapy. She had been sexually abused as a child, and I was seeing her as an adult. And I wanted to ask her a question to sum up the therapy. So I said to her, really, what would you, now that you have had this therapy, you seem full of great spirit, but you weren't this way when you first came in to see me. And I was thinking darkness comes and goes for us all, so she would face darkness again. So I said, well, how did you get to this point? And I thought she was going to list some techniques she learned in the therapy. Instead, she said, oh, it's quite simple. And I said, simple? She said, yeah. The first time I came in to see you, I simply watched how you sat with me, and then I began sitting with myself in the same way. Now, presence and respect is simple and powerful, but it's not easy. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was speaking at General Theological Seminary in New York many years ago. And in the audience were the seminarians, and one of them was sitting next to the dean. And halfway through Desmond Tutu's talk, he pointed up at Tutu and he said to the dean next to him, he said, he's a holy man. And the dean said, well, how do you know that Desmond Tutu is holy? And the young man didn't even blink. He said, I know that Desmond Tutu is holy because when I'm with Desmond Tutu, I feel holy. The question I challenge you with is, how do people feel when they're with you? Do they feel a space of love and acceptance where they can rest their angers, their doubts, their fears? Or do they feel your need to be appreciated, your need to be seen as attractive, as helpful, your need to control the situation? What do people experience? See? Carl Buhner once said, they may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. That sense of presence. So, how do we prepare to be such a presence to others and become more at home with ourselves and God? Well, 3 profound steps, I think. Simple, but profound. One is know the dangers of being a compassionate person. Second is take care of yourself and know yourself more fully each day. And finally, have your own practice of prayerfulness and alone time. So, what are some of the dangers quickly? One is over-involvement. You know, even with those we love, we need to know enough to lean back into the now so we can have a healthy distance from the emotions we have to face. I'm not asking you to be callous. I just don't want you to get overwhelmed by the emotions, needs, unrealistic expectations of those you love and care for. You see, again, this is important. The opposite of detachment is not compassion. It is seduction. We are seduced by people's needs and unrealistic expectations rather than simply asking, what is God calling me to say and do in this situation? And then do it and let God and others take care of the residue. It's difficult to let go, isn't it? There's a Russian proverb that goes, when you sleep next to the cemetery, you can't cry for everyone who dies. When you're dealing with a lot of emotions, you just can't respond at 100% level of emotion like you might do if it were rare. And today it's so common. So detachment is part of a triad. We lean back, we reappraise, and we renew. The next danger is anger, hurt, and fragility among your family, friends, and coworkers. You know, it's around us. It's around us. You know, and you just don't expect it. I remember mentoring a colleague who was really upset because she had been stabbed in the back by this religious organization she was working in, and oh my God, was she? And she came in to see me one day and surprised me. She said, "Oh, I read your book, Riding the Dragon, and I really loved it." I said, "Oh, thank you." And then in the next breath, she said, "Too bad you're not like what you've written." Well, after I prayed for her early happy death, I said to her, "Well, of course I'm not like what I've written. People don't, I'm not like what they write or say or preach, lecture. They're pointing to where they need to go themselves." And then I did a double reflection. I reflected within myself and then pastorally with her, because I said, I said, "But from the tone in your voice, it sounds like you feel I've let you down in some way. Maybe we can talk about it." You see, she felt safe enough to say that and knew that I wouldn't retaliate. So this whole sense of knowing that danger, I mean, it's you're going to always have it. I speak to pastoral ministers and I remind them of that things are always, you're always going to have people in the parish that are a pain in the neck. I have a colleague who feels there are only 3 irritating parishioners in the whole country, and they just travel from parish to parish. The reality is we're going to deal with it. It's going to drain us. I remember coming home from work one day and my wife said, "Well, how are you doing?" And I said, "Awful." She said, "Did something happen today?" I said, "No." "Well, why did you say awful?" I said, "Well, when you asked the question, I felt like crying. I mean, that's not like me." And then I sat down and I realized what was going on over the days and weeks and months. People's anger and stress and depression and unrealistic expectations. One minute I would be fine, but if I didn't meet their demands in exactly how they want them met, then I was bad. It had sucked me dry. Now, what do you do with that? Well, I'm going to turn not to a behavioral scientist or a mental health professional, but to Thomas Merton. He was walking past the day room one day, and in the day room, he saw an old monk, 40, 50 years a monk. He looked down and he went in and he said, "Brother, are you okay?" And he said, "Father Lewis, I'm not okay." He said, "I think I'm losing my joy, my peace, maybe even my faith." Well, what would you say to somebody like that who's been in that long? Well, Merton, he smiled at him, put his hand gently on his shoulder, and he looked him in the eye and he said, "Brother, courage comes and goes. Hold on for the next supply." And that's what we need: patience. We need courage. And we also, need perseverance. We also need to be careful of those around us who want to make us into martyrs. We have friends that, they'll say, "How are you doing?" And I'll explain what I do. And they'll say, "Oh my gosh, that must suck you dry." And I said, "Well, I really love what they're negative, and in their effort to support me, I don't know whether to go home later and stab myself in the elbow or the knee." They mean well, but make sure that you're surrounding yourselves with people who not only understand your stress, but understand your joy, understand the things that really bring you alive. And finally, the last danger I want to give you is when your personal and professional stress intermingle. When that happens, it can be very, very dangerous. So take care when you feel that stress, both at work and at home. Let's move on to the next slide, which is developing a self-care protocol. Now, self-care protocol is basically, a list of the kinds of things that we need to take care of ourselves. And I would urge you to make a list of them. You'll see an outline if you have a library near you, and they have my book Bounce from Oxford. You'll see a list of the kinds of things I'm speaking about. We don't have time here, but a self-care protocol is essential. Again, one of the greatest things that we can share with others is a sense of our own inner peace and resilience and strength and a healthy perspective, but we can't share what we don't have. So what's in a self-care protocol? Well, reading, and I remember a colleague of mine saying, "Well, how much are you reading?" And I said, "Well, I really don't have the time." He said, 5 minutes of fiction a night is a lot of fiction over a year. Maybe it's going to a movie. Maybe it's taking a walk, and you may, and taking a walk is dramatic. And you might say, "Well, why?" Well, it's the oxygen exchange. See, depression doesn't like to live with activity. So going out, getting that oxygen exchange, even if it's a short walk, can make a difference. Having a good circle of friends, and as it's on the slide here, we see 4 types of friends. And those 4 types of friends, they're voices really that are important. And what are those 4 friends? One is the prophet. No one likes the prophet. Henry Thoreau once said, "If you see someone coming to do good for you, run for your life." But the prophet asks, what voices are guiding us in life? What voices are we listening to that may be making us miserable? See? The second friend is the cheerleader who supports us. If you just have prophets, you'll burn out. If you just have cheerleaders, you won't grow. You need both clarity and kindness. The third type of friend is the harasser or teaser, because on the way to taking God seriously, it's very easy to do a detour and take yourself too seriously. And the final friend is the inspirational friend that calls you to be all that you can be without embarrassing you that you are where you are. So the self-care protocol, presence to self, including that, is really improving self-awareness, which would be the next slide. The improving self-awareness. And I think that self-awareness doesn't happen, and neither does the question of prayer happen if we take three dark alleyways. People say to me, well, I don't have time to reflect. Well, the quality of your life depends on it. Or I don't have time to pray. Well, what are you doing with your time? I don't think it's people don't have time. It's they're not giving it the value level. And also when they do sit in silence and solitude and wrapped in gratitude before God, excuse me, what happens? They go down three dark alleyways. The first dark alleyway is arrogance, where they project the blame on others. It's always everybody else's fault. You know, it's fun to give away the blame, but then you give away the power to change, to grow, to deepen. The second dark alleyway is ignorance. And what do I mean by that? Condemning yourself. Condemning yourself is not humility. It isn't. As a matter of fact, it prevents change, because behavior that you wince at in yourself will turn into behavior that you wink at. You can't keep picking on yourself. It's not possible. And the third dark alleyway is discouragement. Discouragement. So what am I selling here then in both self-awareness and prayer? A sense of intrigue. When you become intrigued about yourself, you will do something. You'll have your gifts in one hand and your growing edges or defenses in the other, and you'll see them with a sense of equanimity. You'll be constantly intrigued by the gifts that God has given you. And you might say, well, isn't that narcissism? No, because they're gifts. They're from God. So that you have a responsibility of recognizing not only your primary gifts, but your lesser signature strengths, and really feed those and share those with others. I think that's essential. And we have three callings, I think, with those gifts. The first is self-awareness, knowing what your name is before God. Maybe for me, it's passion. The second calling that usually comes in your 40s and 50s and early 60s is a need to prune those gifts. So for me, rather than simply being passionate, I need to be a gentle, passionate presence. And the final call at the end of our lives is to take that pruning element and center yourself on it. It's very mysterious. So for me, it's very important to emphasize gentleness. Now, will I always be known as passionate? Yes, but the focus is that gentleness. So the three calls again is finding your name, self-understanding. Second is pruning or surrender. And third is the leap into mystery, where we seek to find those elements that are lesser known in ourselves and center ourselves with them. And this brings us to prayer. And I think what I'm going to suggest is take a look at your rule of prayer. You know, in the 4th and 5th century, you had the Abbas and Ammas of the desert, and they used to develop a rule of prayer so they would not be controlled by Chronos, secular time, but instead Kairos, God's time. So they had liturgy where they met God in the Eucharist and in the Word and each other, and they had faith sharing, and like we're doing today, and formal prayer and reflections during the day. They'd stop themselves during the day because someone once said life is something that happens while we're busy doing something else. And then spiritual reading and scripture. And the suggestion I'd give to you from scripture is that you pick a gospel and that you take a point from each chapter and memorize it. Like I picked John's gospel, and I can walk through it at night before I go to bed, and I remember a theme from each. And I have a bad memory, so it took me a while to do this, but just a theme, like in John 1, you know, the light in the world, right? John 2, the Cana and the destruction of the temple. So in 3, people prefer the darkness, and so on. And then finally, contemplation. You know, Anne Lamott said in a way only she can, almost anything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. But she also said it's not easy. She said, my mind is like a bad neighborhood. I don't like to go there alone. So the way we meditate is essential. Well, let me bring this all to a close, and then we'll see what questions we have. In the 10th session of spiritual mentoring or therapy, the people I work with often have had a chance to put all the dirt on the table. And I see their sadness, their anger, the feeling of being misunderstood. And I'm overwhelmed myself. And I think to myself, if only you could see how good you are, how wonderful you are as a person. And I hope during the therapy that'll happen for them, or the spiritual mentoring. And that's my hope for you. If you haven't been in darkness recently and you're not in darkness now, you will be shortly. Why? Because darkness comes and goes for us all. And you may try to use good psychology, and you should. It's like a plow for the field. But the darkness may not lift as fast as you'd like. You may get on your knees and pray, and still the darkness doesn't lift as fast as you'd like. Well, I promise you no less darkness and no quicker lifting, but I promise you this, that if you sit in that darkness and you're faithful to being compassionate to others, even though you feel dark, if you sit in that darkness and seek to be more present to yourself and self-understanding and self-love and self-care, and you're faithful in that darkness in your contemplation and presence to God, you will be different. You'll be deeper. And you might say, well, why? When you're fully present in the darkness, you experience humility. And when you take knowledge and you add humility, you get wisdom. And when you take that very wisdom and add it to compassion, you get love. And love is at the heart of life. God is love. So there is hope, but we need to give it a little attention so that we don't experience any unnecessary darkness in life. President John F. Kennedy said, one person can make a difference, and every person should try. I know you're all trying in these tough times, but take some moments out to reflect on balance in your own life so that you can continue trying and making a difference. Well, I don't know any, so maybe we can go to the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob. I encourage everyone or anyone to go ahead and type in a question for Dr. Wicks. What you shared with us was definitely inspirational, thought-provoking also, and challenging. And I love your humor sprinkled in. So you guys can go ahead and type in a question in the question box. And we've already got a question here from Patricia. She wanted to know, what was the third dark alley to avoid that you mentioned?
Discouragement. And discouragement is interesting. It has been called the last home of the ego, because I think we become discouraged because we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others. We commit the tyranny of hope, which by that I mean that we have expectations that may be good, but those expectations are of others and that can't meet them, and we add an additional cross rather than help them. So discouragement is that third dark alley.
Thank you. Diana said, powerful and insightful. Jennifer asks, and what was the fourth type of friend?
Okay, the first, remember, is the prophet who says what voices are guiding us. The second is the cheerleader who's supportive. The third is the harasser or teaser who helps us keep perspective. We can take ourselves too seriously. And the final friend is the inspirational friend who calls us to be all that we can be without embarrassing us that we are where we are.
Wonderful. Let's see, Heather asks, once you get discouraged, how do you get out of it?
Okay, first you recognize the discouragement and don't pick on yourself for being discouraged. Well, I shouldn't be in that. No, don't go there. Then you're just adding to your own issues. First, allow yourself to be discouraged and recognize that it is a sign that you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be discouraged. It's that you really are trying to do the best by yourself and with others. The second is start to pick up, the dysfunctional cognitions. Cognitions are the ways we think, perceive, and understand. And often we don't challenge them. Like we say to ourselves, well, I failed at that. Well, but tell me, what do you mean by failure? And then as you present the situation, that failure simply meant that you didn't succeed either as the person wanted you to succeed or you expected yourself to succeed. So failure in itself can help us, number one, recognize what we might do the next time. Failure can help us really be more resilient because we start to get used to the fact that we can't always succeed. So we're not looking for 100% success and reinforcement. And that intermittent reinforcement is a lot more powerful than the constant reinforcement. We learn what works and what doesn't work. So it helps us in our knowledge base. It helps us also recognize we cannot do this alone. So we recognize that we need others and we need God. One of the nice things about failing is all of a sudden you realize that you have forgotten the presence of God. You've made yourself into a God. That's why Mother Teresa would say things like, please remember that ministry is not the light. The light is coming from another room. It's the spirit. And your ministry reflects the light. It's not the light. And you'll see people will worship the light and even make mistakes. I've watched Catholic universities make decisions based on a need to succeed and forgotten what their core charism and calling. It's also hospitals can do that. That's why it's wonderful that we have the Catholic Health Association, and the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities and other groups like that, because they call us back systemically to knowing what's right and important.
Wonderful. Because when we talk about failure, many people probably go automatically to I'm a failure, right?
Yeah.
Instead of.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So much good information and insight to reflect on. Pope Francis has called the leaders to smell like the sheep. What if the smell of the sheep is so strong that we don't want to be around the sheep?
We don't. Let's just accept that we don't. I mean, Henry Nouwen, I was up at Harvard years ago and we were sitting in Henry's kitchen, at this little kitchen right off in his apartment, right off Harvard Square. And I was going to write this book called Relationships, Nurturing the Gift of Availability. He looked at me and goes, what? He said, Robert, you're more practical than that. Availability is not simply a gift, it's a problem. So I changed the title to Availability, the Problem and the Gift. And he said, but there must be something from scripture that would help us with this. I said, well, what is it? I don't know. So we talked for a while, and then he said, I got it. It's pruning. When you prune something, it doesn't blossom less, it blossoms more deeply. But Pope Francis, who really has set, I must admit, when I run into trouble, I think of his face. I don't even have to think of a lot of things he said, because he said, we're dealing with messiness. And I watch people pick a single issue in their faith and hide behind that. Well, you can't hide behind even goodness. You have to get in with the sheep that smell. You have to get into the messiness. And I began recognizing too that I'm not called to meet everybody's needs and demands. There are other people in ministry that need to reach them. So I think that the question and the comment are perfect. They're spot on, because nobody wants to be in that scene. Again, Nouwen used to say, we want to back away from it because it doesn't make you feel good. But that's the very place that we should be, because it's there in the circle of grace that we'll find strength and goodness. Yeah.
Wonderful. Diana asked, of all your books, which would you recommend for a group to work with?
Well, if it's on the sense of resilience, probably the riding the dragon. If it's on prayer, probably everyday simplicity. Yeah, those two. And then if you're interested more in the intellectual part of the helping part, the night call from Oxford would be good. Yeah.
Let's see. We have a question here. What are some ways to reflect on balance? Finding balance, maybe?
Yeah. I think look at those three areas. Presence to others. Are you getting out of yourself? I remember, I'd get so into myself. My wife said, well, for goodness sakes, call somebody who's got a problem, and help them. Get out of yourself. See? I think it was Henry James, the novelist, that said, get out of yourself and stay out. So that's one piece. The other piece is, are you really taking care of yourself? People feel so guilty about it. I remember there was this woman, her sons called me and said, you got to see our mother. I said, well, does she want to come in? Yes, she's willing to come in. I said, what's the problem? She's this uber Catholic and she worries about everything. She's a pain in the neck and she's not enjoying her life. Anyway, so she comes in and I used some, therapeutic techniques with her and improved, but I knew I needed to use her faith. So she came in one day and I said to her, I said, you're a prayerful person, aren't you? She said, yes. I said, that's what surprises me. You leave out this one prayer. She said, well, what prayer is it? I said, well, let me do it by way of illustration. If you give a little girl a gift at Christmas, what's the best way she could thank you? She could say thank you, and that's lovely, but wouldn't the best thank you be to see her really enjoying the gift and freely sharing it with her friends, expecting nothing in return? And that's what our life is. That's what Imago Dei, being made in the image and likeness of God, is about. It's enjoying ourselves and sharing it, expecting nothing in return. And to do that, we need to have the space to do it. Let's not be arrogant. We need to take out time to enjoy ourselves, take out time to be with friends, even if it's virtually like we're doing. Take out time for prayer. See? If we do that, then certainly we've got an abundance to share with others. People say, but I don't have the time. When they speak particularly about prayer, I said, before you get out of bed in the morning, take a few moments. When you're in the shower, take a few moments. When you're in the car, don't quickly turn on the radio, And also when you turn it on and you're listening to the news, don't listen to more than 5 minutes. You want to be aware, but you don't want to be overwhelmed. And I said, during the day, when you have lunchtime, take a walk. There are times when you can close the door. People will follow me. Go into the bathroom, close the door. Take out those times because they will really allow you to be with yourself and be with God in ways that you'll live out of those in the way you are with people.
Mary Jo asks, how do you prevent yourself from listening to the negative chatter in your head, those negative thoughts?
Well, the first thing is tease yourself. I often tease myself when I get, those negative thoughts. I say, oh, well, of course, that you're not God, I'm God. See? And all of these things that I have failed at, I shouldn't because I'm God. So I recognize them and tease myself. Because I think we take them so seriously. But she's already done the first step, which is to pick them up. Other people don't pick them up, and they stay there. That's why people will often say, I don't like to pray because then I get these negative thoughts. They're rolling around in your head anyway. Just let them come to the surface. The only memory that'll hurt you is the one forgotten because it operates sub rosa. Instead, let them move through you like a train. And take note of them. Don't entertain them. Don't suppress them. Just note them. So she's already doing that. She's noting them. Then respond to them. Respond because they're often crazy thoughts. Respond to them. And then eventually, and also focus on the positive elements as well. Positive elements that what you're doing, look at your talents, not only the obvious ones that people, have characterized you as, but look at the lesser talents that maybe people discover on a plane or a train when you're sitting next to them because they don't have you typecast. See? So don't typecast yourself. But that's a good question, and I think we need to take it on, because when we take it on, then it becomes the contemplation, the life becomes juicy, it becomes real. Real spirituality dawns when God becomes as real as the problems and joys we face each day. Yeah.
Yes. So another question I think piggybacks on this. One asked about the negative thoughts, and now somebody else is asking about the negative people in your life.
Oh, right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to be careful of that. I remember going to Ireland, landing at the airport, and none greeted me and she said, "Oh, you poor suck, you." I said, "Sister, why am I a poor? Oh, you flew all the way over here, you poor dear. God bless you. You must be exhausted." I said, "Well, I took a week off before I got on the plane, and we had a little hoolie, a party on board. You're lucky I looked this good, actually." She said, "Oh, but to be jumping in and killing yourself." I said, "Sister, I love it here in Ireland. Not my first time to teach. Your scenery is great, but it's the second best thing. The best thing are you Irish over here. You give me a kick. I mean, even your road signs, they're basically hints. So she said, "Oh, but then you'd be going home and killing yourself." And I said, "Well, when I go home, I'm going to take a week off. Then you'd be jumping in." I know. I said, "I'll be teaching at St. Michael's College in Vermont in the summer. I don't know why they pay me. It's so lovely." "You can't kid me. It takes a toll out here." I said, "Well, then I'm going to take a couple of days off at Martha's Vineyard." At which point she stopped and blinked and said, "My God, you take a lot of time off, don't you?" The reality is some people have to view the negative. And I just nod and smile and thank them for being kind as they can be. But I find people that will nourish me. And I don't see that as, a joke. I see that as essential. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think we could go on and on for hours, but
You have
our
a, you
time.
have a time for me to close with a prayer?
Yes, and would you repeat your email address too?
Oh,
People want to know that.
It's rwicks, Wicks, at Loyola, LOYOLA.edu. And that will get to Loyola in Baltimore. I mean, people say, "Oh, it's Chicago." It's like a franchise, isn't it? You get a few Jesuits together, you could start your own Loyola. But I'm in the Maryland franchise. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Let
one
me.
more thing before we end with a prayer. I wanted to offer everybody this discount on your books. We got 2 here. There's 2 more that will show up in the email tomorrow that the 25% off will account for or apply to. So it's webinar 0623 at Ave Maria Press, and that expires on the 3rd of July. And then I am going to send all of you the link to the recording. I know everybody is very interested in listening to it again because it was filled with so much great information, wisdom that really can help us. We thank you so much. And then I want you guys to join us next Tuesday on the 30th. We're going to be talking about how we can dialogue with our multicultural Catholic communities about race, faith, and culture. So we hope you join us for that also.
Great.
Okay, Bob, you can wrap things up.
It's a modern lament. It's called "Find Me Again, Lord." In the past, there are so many times you have found me, Lord, that I can't even recall all of them anymore. One moment I'd find myself feeling all alone, and the next you would be at my side. Let me know you are there in the splash of a goose landing in the water, the noise of a city at night, or in the quiet of a still forest. I need you to find me again, Lord. Help me know you are thinking of me in the way someone offers a smile, in the care expressed in a note sent to me, or simply in a cup of coffee slowly enjoyed. I need you to find me again, Lord. Possibly the tears quietly sitting on my cheek will remind you once again of me. Maybe the giggles of a child or broad grin of an old friend will have me recall your presence once more. But whatever it might be, I need you to find me again, Lord. So I hope you will whisper my name in some way so I can feel your intimate presence in my life. Yes, I need you to find me again, Lord, soon. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Erin. Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.